The iron wheels of the train screeched against the rails as it pulled into the small station of Williams, Arizona Territory, in the summer of 1885. Zara Keller clutched her worn leather satchel with trembling fingers, peering through the soot-stained window at what would be her new home. The journey from Philadelphia had been long, exhausting, and filled with second thoughts, but there was no turning back now. Somewhere in this dusty frontier town waited Thomas Yates, the man whose letters had promised her a life of comfort and respectability as his wife. Williams Station. 10-minute stop. The conductor's voice boomed through the passenger car, startling Zara from her thoughts. She gathered her belongings, one trunk containing everything she owned in this world, and stepped onto the wooden platform. The late afternoon sun beat down mercilessly, immediately causing beads of sweat to form along her hairline. The air smelled of dust, horse manure, and the acrid smoke from the locomotive. Nothing like the coal-tinged but familiar air of Philadelphia. Zara scanned the small crowd that had gathered at the station. Thomas had described himself as tall with light brown hair and a neatly trimmed mustache. His last letter had assured her he would be waiting when her train arrived. Yet as the crowd thinned and passengers dispersed, no one approached her. "Miss, you looking for someone?" asked the station master, a weathered man with kind eyes. "Yes, I'm supposed to meet Thomas Yates." "We're to be married," she replied, feeling heat rise to her cheeks at having to explain her situation. The station master's expression shifted, a flicker of something pity perhaps crossing his face. "Yates, you say? Lives about half a mile from town in that small white house past the general store." "I believe so. His letters mentioned a white house with a small garden." "Well, miss, I don't think he's coming today," the station master said carefully. "Been in the saloon since noon last I heard." Zara's heart sank. "The saloon, but he's expecting me. We've arranged everything." "If you'd like to wait here, I could send someone to fetch him," the station master offered. "No, thank you. I'll find my way." Pride stiffened her spine. She hadn't traveled nearly 2,000 miles to sit helplessly on a bench. After getting directions, Zara arranged for her trunk to be delivered later and set off toward town, her satchel heavy in her hand and uncertainty heavier in her heart. The main street of Williams was a far cry from Philadelphia's cobblestone avenues. Wooden boardwalks lined both sides of the dirt road, connecting an assortment of buildings: a general store, a barber shop, a hotel, and the saloon that apparently held her intended husband. The Silver Dollar Saloon had swinging doors that creaked as Zara pushed through them. She paused at the entrance, the piano music and raucous laughter faltering as all eyes turned toward her. A woman entering a saloon was unusual enough to warrant attention, but Zara's travel-worn but clearly Eastern clothing marked her as even more of an oddity. "Can I help you, miss?" the barkeep asked, wiping his hands on a dingy cloth. "I'm looking for Thomas Yates," she said, struggling to keep her voice steady. A few snickers rippled through the room. Then a slurred voice called out from a corner table. "That'd be me, darlin'. Come to join the party." Zara's eyes found the source of the voice, a disheveled man slumped in his chair, surrounded by empty glasses. His hair was unwashed, his clothes rumpled, and his eyes bloodshot. Nothing like the respectable, hard-working man who had written such eloquent letters promising her a good life. She approached slowly, disbelief making each step difficult. "Mr. Yates, I'm Zara Keller. We've been corresponding for the past 8 months." He squinted at her, recognition slowly dawning on his face. "Mail order bride," he mumbled. "Forgot you were coming today." The humiliation burned through her. Every eye in the saloon watched as her future crumbled before her. "Perhaps we should discuss this somewhere more private," she suggested, desperately clinging to her dignity. Thomas attempted to stand, swayed dangerously, and collapsed back into his chair with a laugh that held no humor. "Nowhere to go, pretty lady. House isn't fit for company. Been meaning to clean up, but—" He gestured vaguely toward his glass. This seemed more important. "You're drunk," she stated flatly. "Most days," he agreed, reaching for his glass again. Before Zara could respond, a deep voice spoke from behind her. "That's enough, Yates. The lady deserves better than this welcome." She turned to find a tall man standing there, his presence commanding attention without effort. Unlike the other men in the saloon, his clothes were clean though worn, and his eyes, startlingly blue against his sun-darkened skin, were clear and direct. "This isn't your business, Tucker," Thomas slurred. "I'm making it my business," the man Tucker replied evenly. He turned to Zara. "Madam, I'm Tucker Young. I ranch outside of town. Neighbor to this fool, actually. If you'll allow me, I can help you find proper accommodations for tonight." Zara hesitated. She had traveled across the country to marry a man who now revealed himself as a drunkard, and a stranger was offering help. Her options were limited, her funds nearly depleted after the journey. "Thank you, Mr. Young, but I'm not sure you can't stay with him," Tucker said quietly, nodding toward Thomas, who had already lost interest in their conversation and was calling for another drink. "Not like this. Williams has a decent hotel. Clean, respectable. My sister works there. I can arrange a room for you while you sort things out." "I have little money left," Zara admitted, hating the vulnerability in her voice. Tucker's expression softened slightly. "Let's worry about that later. Right now, you need rest and a meal that wasn't made in a train kitchen." Something about his straightforward manner reassured her. This wasn't charity offered with pity, but practical assistance from someone who understood the harsh realities of frontier life. "Very well, Mr. Young. I accept your help and I thank you for it." As they turned to leave, Thomas called out, his voice bitter. "Don't get comfortable helping her, Tucker. She's still my bride. Paid good money to bring her here." Tucker paused, his jaw tightening visibly, but he didn't respond. Instead, he placed a respectful hand near Zara's elbow, not touching her, but guiding her, and led her out into the fading daylight. Outside, Zara took a deep breath, fighting back tears of disappointment and exhaustion. "I apologize for Thomas," Tucker said quietly as they walked toward the hotel. "He wasn't always like this. His letters were so different," she said. "Thoughtful, articulate. He wrote about building a life together, about his plans for the future." Tucker nodded. "He was different a year ago. Good rancher, respected in town. Then his sister and her husband died of fever. He took it hard, started drinking. Lost most of his cattle to neglect after that." "I didn't know," Zara said, feeling a pang of sympathy despite her anger and disappointment. "No reason you would. Men like Thomas show their best selves in letters to prospective brides." There was no judgment in Tucker's tone, just a statement of fact. They reached the Williams Hotel, a two-story wooden structure that, while modest, appeared clean and well-maintained. True to his word, Tucker spoke with his sister, a pretty woman named Sarah who worked as the hotel manager, and arranged a room for Zara. "You're all set for tonight," Tucker said when he returned to where Zara waited in the small lobby. "Sarah's putting together some supper for you too." "Mr. Young, I insist on repaying you as soon as I'm able," Zara said firmly. Tucker's mouth curved slightly, not quite a smile, but close. "We can discuss that later. For now, get some rest. Tomorrow will be time enough to decide what comes next." "What comes next?" she echoed. "I came here to be married." "Yes, madam, you did, but I don't think Thomas Yates is in any condition to be a husband right now." He touched the brim of his hat. "I'll come by in the morning if that's agreeable. My ranch is just north of Thomas's property. I can take you out there if you still want to see it, or we can figure out other arrangements." After he left, Zara was shown to a small but clean room on the second floor. She sat on the edge of the bed, finally allowing the tears to come. She had sold most of her possessions to afford the journey west, had left behind the few friends she had, all on the promise of a new life with a man who couldn't even stay sober for her arrival. Sarah Young brought up a tray with a simple but hearty meal beef stew, fresh bread, and apple pie that still steamed from the oven. "My brother said you had a rough welcome to Williams," Sarah said kindly. "I'm sorry for that." "Your brother was very helpful," Zara replied, wiping away her tears. "I don't know what I would have done otherwise. Tucker's a good man, keeps to himself mostly but always helps when needed." Sarah hesitated. "If you don't mind me asking, what will you do now?" "I don't know," Zara admitted. "I have very little money left. I suppose I could try to find work here until I can save enough to return east, but you gave up everything to come here," Sarah finished for her. "Listen, if you decide to stay in Williams, I can talk to the hotel owner about hiring another girl. The town's growing and we're getting busier." "That's very kind, thank you." Zara managed a small smile. After Sarah left, Zara ate her meal, grateful for the hot food and privacy. As exhaustion overtook her, one thought remained clear: the difference between Thomas Yates's written promises and the harsh reality couldn't be starker. But even in this moment of despair, the image of Tucker Young's steady gaze stayed with her. At least one person in this town had shown her genuine kindness. And for now, that would have to be enough. Morning arrived with golden light streaming through the thin curtains of Zara's hotel room. She had slept fitfully, dreams of Philadelphia mingling with images of Thomas slumped in that saloon chair, and Tucker Young's concerned face. Rising early, she washed with the cold water from the pitcher on the dresser and dressed in her second-best dress, a sensible blue cotton that had fared better during travel than yesterday's garment. A knock at her door came just as she finished pinning her hair. "Miss Keller, it's Sarah Young. I've brought breakfast and some news." Zara opened the door to find Sarah holding a tray laden with eggs, bacon, and coffee. Behind her stood a thin, older woman with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense expression. "This is Mrs. Henderson, the hotel owner," Sarah explained. "I told her about your situation, and she'd like to speak with you." Mrs. Henderson didn't waste time on pleasantries. "Sarah says you're stranded with no funds and possibly no husband, depending on what Mr. Yates sobers up enough to decide. Is that accurate?" Zara flushed. "I wouldn't put it quite that way, but yes, my circumstances are precarious at the moment. Can you read and write? Do sums?" "Yes, madam. I worked as a shopkeeper's assistant in Philadelphia for several years." "Good. I need someone to manage the books and help at the front desk when Sarah's busy. Room and board included, small wage to start. Interested?" The offer came so suddenly that Zara could only stare for a moment. Then relief washed over her. "Yes, I would be very grateful for the opportunity." "Nothing to be grateful for. I need help, you need work. Start tomorrow morning." With a curt nod, Mrs. Henderson turned and left as abruptly as she had appeared. Sarah laughed at Zara's bewildered expression. "She's always like that, direct as a bullet. But fair and honest, you could do worse for an employer out here." "It seems Providence has smiled on me after all," Zara said, feeling a small weight lift from her shoulders. At least she wouldn't be destitute. "Oh, and Tucker sent word he'll be by around 10 to take you out to see Yates's property, if you still want to go." Zara hesitated. "Do you think I should?" Sarah set down the breakfast tray and considered the question. "You came all this way based on an agreement. Seems to me you should at least see what you're walking away from if that's what you decide. And Thomas isn't a bad man, really, just broken." "Your brother mentioned Thomas lost his sister." "Yes, Catherine and her husband died of typhoid last year. They had a little boy too, only 4. Thomas was very close to them, had them living on his property in a smaller house. Their deaths hit him hard. Sarah's expression grew troubled. The drinking started as a way to sleep, I think. Then it became his way to get through each day. This new information complicated Zara's feelings. The man she'd met in the saloon was a far cry from the thoughtful correspondent whose letters had won her heart, but grief could change a person. Still, she hadn't come west to be a nursemaid or a redemption project. At precisely 10 o'clock, another knock came at her door. Tucker Young stood in the hallway, hat in hand. Today, he wore a clean shirt under his worn leather vest, and his dark hair was neatly combed. He looked like he belonged on the cover of one of those dime novels about Western heroes that Zara had sometimes glimpsed in Philadelphia bookshop windows. "Morning, Miss Keller. You feeling better today?" he asked. "Yes, thank you, Mr. Young. And I've had some good fortune. Mrs. Henderson has offered me a position here at the hotel." Something flickered across Tucker's face. Relief, perhaps. "That's good news, Mrs. Henderson runs a tight ship, but she's fair. You could do worse in Williams." "So I've been told," Zara replied with a small smile. "Your sister mentioned you offered to show me Mr. Yates's property, if you're still interested. I spoke with Thomas this morning. He's sober, at least for now, and expecting us." Zara's stomach tightened with anxiety, but she nodded. "I should see it. I came all this way after all." Tucker led her to where his horse was hitched outside the hotel, a sturdy chestnut gelding with intelligent eyes. Alongside was a small wagon with a gentle-looking bay mare in the traces. "Borrowed the wagon from the livery," Tucker explained. "Thought it would be more comfortable for you than riding double." The consideration touched her. Tucker helped her up onto the wagon seat, then mounted his horse. As they made their way out of town, Zara had her first real look at the landscape that surrounded Williams. The town sat in a valley with ponderosa pine forests stretching up the slopes of distant mountains. The air was clearer than anything she'd known in Philadelphia, and despite everything, she found herself admiring the wild beauty of the territory. "It's beautiful here," she said, breaking the comfortable silence that had fallen between them. Tucker glanced at her, a hint of surprise on his face. "Most Easterners don't see it that way at first. Too much space, they say, too much sky." "There is that," she agreed, "but also a kind of honesty to it. The land doesn't pretend to be anything other than what it is." "Unlike people," Tucker observed quietly. They traveled another mile before turning onto a narrow dirt road that led to a small white house set against a backdrop of pines. A neglected garden surrounded it, once neat rows now choked with weeds. A barn stood nearby, its red paint fading and peeling. Several horses grazed in a corral, looking thin but not mistreated. As they approached, the front door opened, and Thomas Yates stepped onto the porch. Sober, he was indeed the handsome man he described in his letters, tall and well-built, with light brown hair and an expressive face currently set in lines of shame. "Miss Keller," he called as Tucker helped her down from the wagon. "I owe you an apology for yesterday." Zara approached the house, Tucker following slightly behind her like a protective shadow. "Yes, Mr. Yates, you do," she agreed, meeting his gaze directly. Thomas flinched at her directness but nodded. "I haven't been at my best lately. I should have told you in my letters, but I was afraid you wouldn't come, and I need someone to help me make this place what it once was." His eyes pleaded with her. "I can be a good husband, a good provider, once I get back on my feet." Zara felt a flicker of the connection she'd felt reading his letters. There was intelligence and feeling in his eyes when they weren't clouded by alcohol. "Why don't you show Miss Keller around the property, Thomas?" Tucker suggested. "I'll check on that fence in your south pasture while you talk." As Tucker rode off, Thomas gave Zara an awkward tour. The house was small but solidly built, with 3 rooms, a main living area with a kitchen, a bedroom, and a small study. Everything was in disarray, unwashed dishes piled in a basin, clothes strewn about, papers scattered across every surface. "It wasn't always like this," Thomas said repeatedly, his embarrassment palpable. Outside, he showed her the barn, the chicken coop now empty of birds, the garden that had once produced vegetables. A smaller cabin stood about 100 yards away. "That's where my sister and her family lived," he explained, his voice thick. "I haven't been able to. I keep meaning to clean it out, but—" "Mr. Yates," Zara said finally, as they stood in the overgrown garden, "I came here expecting to marry a man who could offer me stability and a partnership. Your letters spoke of your successful ranch, your plans for the future. What I see here is a mess," he finished for her. "I know. But it could be good again, with help, with someone to care for." His vulnerability was disarming, but Zara had not come all this way to be someone's salvation. Before she could respond, the sound of hoofbeats announced Tucker's return. "Fence is holding up," Tucker reported. "But you've got a stray heifer in your south corner. Brought her back to the main herd." "Thanks," Thomas muttered, clearly resenting needing help from his neighbor. An uncomfortable silence fell. Zara looked between the 2 men, Thomas with his evident struggle against his demons, Tucker with his quiet strength, and felt torn between compassion and self-preservation. "Miss Keller has taken a position at the hotel," Tucker finally said. "Mrs. Henderson hired her this morning." Thomas's expression darkened. "That wasn't our arrangement. You came here to be my wife." "I came here to marry the man who wrote those letters," Zara replied steadily. "A man who had his life in order and could be a true partner. I'm not sure that man exists, Mr. Yates." "So you're breaking your promise?" Anger flared in Thomas's eyes. "I'm suggesting we take some time," she countered. "You clearly need to make changes in your life. I need to establish myself here. Perhaps in a few weeks, if you've shown you can stay sober and restore some order to your ranch, we might reconsider our arrangement." Thomas looked like he wanted to argue, but instead slumped against the garden fence. "And where will you stay? With him?" He jerked his head toward Tucker. "At the hotel, as Mr. Young already mentioned," Zara said firmly. "Where I will be working to support myself while you decide what kind of man you truly want to be." The ride back to town was tense. Tucker didn't pry, for which Zara was grateful. She had much to consider. Breaking her agreement with Thomas felt wrong, yet rushing into marriage with a man so clearly struggling with grief and alcohol seemed foolish. "He wasn't lying about one thing," Tucker said as they neared town. "He does have a good piece of land. Could be prosperous again with the right care." "Are you suggesting I should honor my commitment regardless of the circumstances?" Zara asked, a touch defensive. "No, madam. Just stating facts." Tucker kept his eyes on the road. "What you do with those facts is your decision alone." When they reached the hotel, Tucker helped her down from the wagon. Their hands touched briefly, and Zara felt an unexpected warmth at the contact. "Thank you for your help these past 2 days, Mr. Young. I don't know what I would have done without your intervention." Tucker touched the brim of his hat. "Neighbors look out for each other out here. It's how we survive." He hesitated. "If you need anything while you're settling in, my ranch is just north of town, about 3 miles up the Pine Ridge Trail." As he turned to leave, Zara called after him. "Mr. Young, do you think he can change? Thomas, I mean." Tucker considered the question seriously. "I've known men who have pulled themselves back from worse, but they had to really want it for themselves, not just to please someone else." His blue eyes met hers. "Good day, Miss Keller." Zara watched him ride away, struck by the quiet wisdom in his words. Whatever happened with Thomas, she sensed that Tucker Young would be a significant part of her new life in Williams, Arizona. The next week passed in a blur of new routines as Zara settled into her position at the hotel. Mrs. Henderson proved to be demanding but fair, and the work keeping the ledgers, managing reservations, and occasionally helping serve meals was straightforward enough. The hotel's small dining room served breakfast and supper to guests, and some of the town's residents, which gave Zara an opportunity to meet many of Williams' citizens. She learned that the town had sprung up around the Atlantic and Pacific Railroad just a few years earlier, and was growing steadily as a gateway to the Grand Canyon, some 60 miles to the north. Cattle ranching, timber, and services for travelers kept the economy moving, and the town had a surprising diversity of people for its small size. Sarah Young became a friend, helping Zara navigate the social landscape of Williams and explaining the complex web of relationships and histories that defined frontier life. Through Sarah, Zara heard occasional news of Thomas. He hadn't been seen at the saloon since their meeting, which was encouraging, but he also rarely came into town at all. Tucker appeared at the hotel every few days, sometimes taking meals there or bringing supplies from his ranch to sell to the hotel kitchen. Each time, he would exchange a few polite words with Zara, ask after her comfort, but never overstep the boundaries of propriety. On Sunday, Zara attended services at the small white church on the edge of town. Afterward, as congregants mingled outside, she was surprised to see Thomas Yates among them. He looked better, still thin, but clean-shaven and clear-eyed. He approached her with hesitant steps. "Miss Keller," he greeted her, hat in hand. "You're looking well." "As are you, Mr. Yates," she replied, noting the lack of tremor in his hands. "I'm glad to see you at services." "First time in months," he admitted. "Been trying to make changes, like you suggested." An awkward silence fell between them. Around them, townspeople pretended not to watch while obviously hanging on every word. "Would you allow me to call on you properly?" Thomas finally asked. "Perhaps supper at the hotel dining room one evening this week." Zara considered the request. He was making an effort, which was more than she had honestly expected. "I have Wednesday evening free," she said. 7 o'clock. Relief washed over his face. "I'll be there. Thank you." As he walked away, Zara became aware of Tucker standing nearby, speaking with the preacher. Their eyes met briefly, and she thought she saw a question in his gaze, but he simply nodded in acknowledgement before turning back to his conversation. Wednesday evening arrived, and Zara found herself unexpectedly nervous as she prepared for supper with Thomas. She wore her best dress, a deep green wool that brought out the gold flecks in her hazel eyes, and arranged her dark hair more carefully than usual. Whatever happened tonight would likely determine whether she would honor her original agreement to marry Thomas or forge a new path in Williams. Thomas arrived promptly at 7, wearing a clean suit that hung a bit loosely on his frame. He had brought her a small bouquet of wildflowers, clearly gathered from the meadows around his property. "These are lovely, thank you," Zara said, genuinely touched by the gesture. "They pale next to you," Thomas replied, a hint of his former charm emerging. "I've missed your letters these past weeks, your thoughts, your perspective on things." The hotel dining room was busy that evening, and Zara was conscious of curious eyes upon them as they were seated at a corner table. News traveled fast in a small town like Williams, and everyone knew the story of the mail-order bride whose groom had been too drunk to meet her train. "I've been making improvements at the ranch," Thomas said after they had ordered. "Repaired the chicken coop, started clearing the garden. Tucker's been helping some, though I hate needing it." "That's very neighborly of him," Zara observed. Thomas's expression tightened slightly. Tucker Young has always been the perfect neighbor, the perfect rancher, the perfect everything, according to this town. Never mind that some of us have faced hardships he hasn't. The bitterness in his voice surprised her. I didn't mean to compare you. Thomas sighed, running a hand through his hair. No, I apologize. It's just difficult sometimes. Tucker's ranch is thriving while mine falls apart. He manages alone while he trailed off, clearly not wanting to mention his drinking. Loss affects everyone differently, Zara said gently. Your sister's death was clearly devastating for you. It wasn't just Catherine, Thomas said, his voice lowering. It was everything. Her husband James was my best friend since boyhood. We came west together, staked our claims side by side. And little Matthew. His voice broke. That boy was the closest thing to a son I'll ever have. Zara reached across the table to touch his hand, moved by his raw grief. I'm so sorry, Thomas. He turned his hand to grasp hers. I know I've made a mess of things, the drinking. It helped me sleep without seeing their faces, but I'm trying now, really trying. His eyes held hers, earnest and pleading. I still want to honor our agreement. I still need a wife, a partner. Someone to help me rebuild. Their food arrived, interrupting the moment. As they ate, Thomas spoke of his plans for the ranch, restoring the cattle herd, replanting the garden, perhaps adding sheep, which required less labor than cattle. Zara found herself drawn in by his obvious intelligence and vision. This was the man whose letters had impressed her, not the drunk from the saloon. Yet something held her back from fully recommitting to their arrangement. Perhaps it was the way his hand occasionally trembled, suggesting the struggle with alcohol was ongoing. Or perhaps it was the memory of Tucker Young's steady presence, his quiet strength without demands or desperation. As Thomas walked her to the hotel's front staircase after supper, he paused and took her hands in his. Will you think about it, Zara? About honoring our arrangement? I know I don't deserve a second chance, but I'm asking for one nonetheless. I will think about it, she promised. You've shown real improvement, Thomas, and I respect that. But marriage is a serious commitment. Can I call on you again? Perhaps Sunday after church, she nodded. I'd like that. He leaned forward as if to kiss her, but Zara turned slightly so his lips brushed her cheek instead. Not yet, she thought. I'm not ready. Thomas accepted the gentle rebuff with good grace and bid her good night. As Zara climbed the stairs to her room, conflicting emotions swirled within her. Thomas Yates was trying to be the man he had presented himself as in his letters. Didn't she owe him the chance to make good on his promises? Yet as she prepared for bed, Zara found her thoughts drifting not to Thomas, but to Tucker Young, to his clear blue eyes, and the way he seemed to see straight through pretenses to the heart of matters. There had been no correspondence between them, no promises made, yet something about his steady presence called to her in a way Thomas's passionate declarations did not. The next morning, as Zara was sorting through reservation ledgers at the front desk, the hotel door opened to admit Tucker. He carried a crate of vegetables, presumably for the hotel kitchen. Morning, Miss Keller, he greeted her. Sarah around? She's helping with breakfast service, Zara replied. I can show you to the kitchen if you'd like. Tucker nodded, following her through the dining room to the busy kitchen at the back of the hotel. As the cook inspected the vegetables, mostly late summer squash and early autumn root crops, Tucker turned to Zara. Heard Thomas called on you last night, he said, his tone carefully neutral. News travels fast in Williams, Zara observed with a small smile. Small towns. Tucker shrugged. Not much stays private for long. He's making an effort to change, Zara said, feeling oddly compelled to explain. He hasn't been drinking. Good. Tucker seemed genuinely pleased. Thomas was a good man before the tragedy. Hope he finds his way back. Zara studied him curiously. You two were friends once, weren't you? A shadow crossed Tucker's face. We were, still trying to be, though it's complicated now. Because of me? She asked directly. Tucker met her gaze steadily. Partly, but mostly because it's hard to help someone who resents needing help. Before Zara could respond, the cook finished examining the vegetables and handed Tucker payment. Their conversation was cut short as Sarah appeared, drawing Tucker into a discussion about a delivery of lumber expected for the hotel's planned expansion. Later that afternoon, Zara had her first day off since starting work at the hotel. On Sarah's recommendation, she decided to explore the nearby forest, following a well-worn trail that led to a small creek about a half-mile from town. The September day was perfect warm sunshine, tempered by a cool breeze carrying the scent of pine. The creek burbled pleasantly over smooth stones, creating small pools where tiny fish darted in the clear water. Zara sat on a fallen log, removing her boots to dangle her feet in the cool water. Philadelphia seemed a world away now, its crowded streets and sooty air replaced by the vast openness of the Arizona territory. The sound of approaching hoofbeats startled her. Looking up, she saw Tucker approaching on his chestnut gelding. He reined in when he spotted her. "Miss Keller." "Didn't expect to find anyone out here," he said, tipping his hat. "Mr. Young. What a coincidence." She quickly withdrew her feet from the water, suddenly conscious of the impropriety of being alone with him in such a remote location. Tucker seemed to realize the same thing. "I should move on. Don't want to intrude on your privacy." "No, please," Zara found herself saying. "I'd welcome the company, actually, unless you have pressing business elsewhere." He hesitated, then dismounted, leading his horse to the creek to drink. "Just checking the watershed. We've had a dry summer, need to make sure there's enough water flowing for the winter." "Is that part of your duties as a rancher?" she asked, genuinely curious about his life. "Out here, water is everything." Tucker sat on a rock a respectful distance from her. "Without it, nothing survives, not cattle, not crops, not people." "Thomas mentioned you've been helping him with his ranch," Zara said. "That's very kind, considering." "Considering what?" Tucker asked when she trailed off. Zara hesitated, then decided on honesty. "Considering he seems to resent you for your success while he struggles." Tucker was silent for a long moment, watching the water flow over the stones. "Success out here is mostly luck and stubbornness," he finally said. "I was lucky not to lose family like Thomas did. Lucky to have good water on my property. The rest is just getting up every day and doing what needs doing, no matter how hard it seems." "Is that why you help him? Because you feel fortunate by comparison?" "I help him because that's what neighbors do," Tucker said simply. "And because I know he'd do the same if our situations were reversed." They talked for nearly an hour, moving from discussions of ranching to their respective backgrounds. Tucker had come west from Kentucky, 10 years earlier, when he was just 20, seeking land and independence after his father's death. He'd built his ranch from nothing, learning through trial and error, surviving drought and harsh winters through sheer determination. Zara told him about growing up in Philadelphia, losing her parents to influenza when she was 16, working in various shops to support herself. How Thomas's advertisement in the newspaper had seemed like Providence, a chance for a real home, a family of her own. "And now?" Tucker asked. "What do you want now after seeing Williams and meeting Thomas in person?" The question caught her off guard. What did she want? The security of marriage to Thomas, assuming he stayed sober, independence through her work at the hotel, or something else entirely? "I'm not sure anymore," she admitted. "Everything I thought I wanted has changed since arriving here." Tucker nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Arizona has a way of changing people's plans." He stood, brushing pine needles from his trousers. "I should get back. My foreman will think I've fallen into the creek." As he mounted his horse, he looked down at her. "Thomas is calling on you again Sunday." "Yes, after church," Tucker nodded. "Good. He needs something to work toward." He paused. "Just make sure whatever you decide, it's what you truly want, not what you think you owe anyone." With that, he touched the brim of his hat and rode away, leaving Zara to ponder his words as the creek continued its eternal journey over the stones. Sunday arrived clear and crisp, with a hint of autumn in the air. After church services, Thomas escorted Zara to a small restaurant newly opened near the train station. He was solicitous and attentive, pulling out her chair and asking thoughtful questions about her week at the hotel. "I've made more progress at the ranch," he told her proudly. "Fixed the roof on the barn where it was leaking. Started breaking ground for a winter wheat planting." "That sounds promising," Zara said, genuinely pleased by his enthusiasm. "You seem happier than when I first arrived." "I am," he admitted. "Having a purpose again, knowing you might reconsider our arrangement, it's given me something to work toward." A small alarm bell rang in Zara's mind, echoing Tucker's warning about making decisions for herself, not based on obligation to others. But she pushed it aside. Thomas was making real progress, and wasn't that what she had asked of him? "I was thinking," Thomas continued, leaning forward eagerly, "maybe you could visit the ranch again soon. See the improvements for yourself. Maybe stay for supper. I'm not much of a cook, but I can manage a decent stew." The invitation seemed innocent enough, but Zara hesitated. Being alone with Thomas at his isolated ranch felt premature. "Perhaps in a few weeks," she suggested. "I'm still settling into my position at the hotel, and Mrs. Henderson depends on me for the evening ledger work." Disappointment flickered across Thomas's face, but was quickly replaced by understanding. "Of course. I don't want to rush you. Just know that I'm working hard to be the man you thought you were corresponding with." As they left the restaurant, Thomas suddenly stiffened. Following his gaze, Zara saw Tucker riding slowly down the main street, deep in conversation with another man on horseback. "Every time I turn around, there he is," Thomas muttered. "Tucker. He's just going about his business," Zara said, surprised by the bitterness in Thomas's voice. "Is he? Or is he keeping an eye on me, making sure the town drunk doesn't embarrass himself again?" Thomas's tone had an edge that hadn't been present throughout their meal. "That's unfair," Zara said quietly. "He's been nothing but helpful to both of us." Thomas turned to her, his expression softening with visible effort. "You're right, I'm sorry, it's just difficult sometimes feeling like I'm being watched, judged." He took her hand. "Please don't let my foolishness ruin our day. Would you walk with me a little? The aspen trees near the creek are starting to turn golden." The moment of tension passed, and they spent a pleasant hour walking along the creek path, Thomas pointing out local plants and wildlife with the knowledge of someone who had lived in the area for years. By the time he escorted her back to the hotel, Zara felt more positively disposed toward him than she had since her arrival in Williams. "May I call on you again Wednesday evening?" Thomas asked as they stood on the hotel porch. "Yes, I'd like that," Zara replied sincerely. This time when he leaned in, she allowed his lips to brush hers briefly. It was a chaste kiss, gentle and tentative, but it sealed something between them, a second chance, a possibility. As October progressed, Thomas continued his courtship with steadfast dedication. Each time they met, he reported new improvements to the ranch and showed no signs of returning to drink. Twice weekly, he escorted her to dinner or for walks around Williams. Occasionally, when Tucker was in town, the two men would exchange civil greetings, though Zara noticed an undercurrent of tension between them. Meanwhile, Zara found her place in the community of Williams. Her work at the hotel introduced her to most of the town's residents and many travelers passing through. She joined the church's Ladies' Aid Society and even began teaching basic reading and arithmetic to a few of the town's children 2 evenings a week. One brisk afternoon in mid-October, as Zara was arranging fresh linens in the hotel's guest rooms, Sarah sought her out with an invitation. "Tucker's hosting a harvest gathering at his ranch this Saturday," she explained. "Nothing fancy, just a community meal to celebrate the end of harvest season. Most of the town will be there. Will you come?" "I'd love to," Zara replied. "Thomas hasn't mentioned it, though." Sarah's expression grew slightly uncomfortable. "Well, that's because Tucker always invites everyone, but Thomas hasn't attended since Catherine's death. They used to help host it together, actually." "I see." Zara considered the implications. "Would it be inappropriate for me to attend without Thomas?" "Not at all," Sarah assured her. "Many people come on their own. It's a community event, not a courting opportunity." She hesitated. "Though you might want to mention it to Thomas, just so he doesn't hear about it from someone else." That evening, Zara wrote Thomas a note explaining that she had been invited to Tucker's harvest gathering and planned to attend. His response came the next morning, a brief note saying he understood and would see her for their regular Wednesday supper. When Wednesday arrived, Zara could tell immediately that something was bothering Thomas. He was polite but distracted during their meal, his earlier enthusiasm dimmed. "Is something wrong?" she finally asked as they picked at dessert. Thomas sighed, setting down his fork. "I hear you're attending Tucker's harvest gathering." "Yes, Sarah invited me. I wrote to tell you." "And you're determined to go, even knowing how I feel about Tucker?" Zara frowned. "You said you understood, and I wasn't aware you had such strong feelings about Tucker. You've never really explained what lies between you two beyond his success while you struggled." Thomas was silent for a long moment, staring at his plate. "It's complicated," he finally said. "We were friends once, good friends, but after Catherine died, he tried to help, but his help felt like charity, like he pitied me." His jaw tightened. "And sometimes I think he looks at you the way he used to look at her." Zara stilled. "What are you saying?" "Catherine was supposed to marry Tucker initially," Thomas said quietly. "They had an understanding when she first came west, but then she met James and—" He shrugged. "Tucker stepped aside, never held it against either of them. But I wonder sometimes if he resents me for having been part of their happiness when his was taken away." This revelation stunned Zara. Tucker had never mentioned any connection to Catherine beyond being neighbors. "I had no idea," she said. "It's ancient history now," Thomas said, waving a hand dismissively. "Just explain some of the tension between us. But about Saturday I won't try to stop you from going. Just know that I won't be there." "Would you consider coming?" Zara asked. "It might be a good opportunity to mend things with Tucker, to rejoin the community." Thomas shook his head firmly. "No, I'm not ready for that. The last time I attended was with Catherine, James, and little Matthew. The memories would be too much." Zara reached across the table to take his hand. "I understand, and I appreciate your honesty about this." When Saturday arrived, Zara found herself both excited and nervous about attending the harvest gathering. Sarah had arranged for her to ride out to Tucker's ranch with several other townspeople in a wagon driven by the blacksmith and his wife. Tucker's property took her breath away. Unlike Thomas's struggling homestead, Tucker's ranch showed evidence of years of careful stewardship. The main house was a substantial 2-story structure built of local pine, with a wide porch wrapping around 3 sides. Several outbuildings, a barn, bunkhouse, smokehouse, and workshop formed a neat compound. Beyond, Cattle grazed in verdant pastures, and fields of harvested wheat stretched toward distant pines. The gathering was already in full swing when they arrived. Tables had been set up in the yard, laden with food brought by the attendees. A small group of musicians played lively tunes and children ran about playing games. The atmosphere was festive and welcoming. Tucker greeted each arrival personally. When he reached Zara, his smile seemed to brighten. "Miss Keller, I'm glad you could come," he said. "Your home is beautiful," she replied sincerely. "You've created something remarkable here." A hint of color touched Tucker's tanned cheeks at the compliment. "Thank you, it's been a labor of love." He glanced past her. "Thomas didn't come. No, he sends his regrets." Zara hesitated, then added, "He told me about Catherine, about how she was once special to you." Tucker's expression shuddered briefly. "Did he? Well, that's a story from long ago. Please enjoy yourself today. There's plenty of food and dancing will start after sunset." Throughout the afternoon, Zara observed Tucker in his element, a respected community leader who knew every guest by name, who made sure the elderly had comfortable seats, and that children got their fair share of the apple cider and pumpkin pie. He moved with easy confidence, a man comfortable in his skin and his place in the world. As twilight approached, lanterns were lit around the yard, creating a magical atmosphere. The musicians struck up a lively tune and couples formed for dancing. Zara watched from a bench near the house, content to observe the festivities, not dancing. Tucker's voice came from beside her as he sat down, leaving a respectful distance between them. "No partner," she replied with a smile. Tucker studied her for a moment, then held out his hand. "Would you do me the honor, Miss Keller?" Zara hesitated, thinking of Thomas and his complicated feelings about Tucker. But this was just a community dance, not a betrayal. "I'd be delighted, Mr. Young," she said, taking his hand. The dance was a simple reel that Zara had learned in Philadelphia. Tucker proved to be a capable dancer, guiding her through the steps with the same quiet competence he showed in everything. When their hands met in the figures of the dance, Zara felt an undeniable spark between them, a connection that both thrilled and troubled her. After the dance ended, Tucker led her away from the crowd toward a small rise where the view of the stars was unobstructed by lantern light. "I wanted to ask you something," he said, his voice serious. "About Thomas." Zara tensed slightly. "What about him? Is he treating you well, still staying sober?" "Yes to both," she replied. "He's working hard to rebuild his life." Tucker nodded, relief evident in his expression. "Good. That's good." He hesitated. "And you? Are you happy with how things are progressing between you two?" The direct question caught her off guard. "I think so. Thomas is becoming the man I corresponded with, kind, thoughtful, ambitious." "But—" Tucker prompted, apparently hearing the uncertainty in her voice. Zara sighed, looking up at the vast canopy of stars. "But I sometimes wonder if I'm making a decision based on obligation rather than what I truly want." Tucker was silent for a long moment. "What do you want, Zara?" It was the first time he had used her given name, and it sent a shiver through her that had nothing to do with the evening chill. "I don't know any more," she admitted. "When I came west, I wanted security, a home, a family. I still want those things, but now you know you have choices," Tucker finished for her. "You've made a place for yourself here. You don't need to marry Thomas to belong in Williams." Their eyes met in the starlight, and Zara felt the world narrow to just the two of them. For a breathless moment, she thought Tucker might close the distance between them, might show her with actions what he seemed unable to say with words. Instead, he took a small step back. "We should return to the gathering. People will talk." "The spell broken," Zara nodded. As they walked back toward the lantern-lit yard, she found herself wrestling with unexpected disappointment. and deeper questions about where her heart truly lay. The following week brought the first snowfall of the season, a light dusting that melted by midday, but served as a reminder that winter would soon envelop the high country. Thomas continued his courtship with growing confidence, and Zara found herself warming to him as he showed more and more glimpses of the man whose letters had won her heart. During one of their walks, Thomas broached the subject that had been hovering between them. "Zara, we've been courting for over a month now. I believe I've shown that I'm serious about changing my life. Would you reconsider our original arrangement? Would you marry me?" Though the proposal wasn't unexpected, Zara found herself hesitating. "Thomas, you've made remarkable progress and I admire your determination. But marriage is a lifetime commitment. I want to be certain." Disappointment crossed his face, but he nodded. "I understand. What would make you certain, time?" she replied honestly. "Perhaps after Christmas. That would give us 2 more months to be sure we're well suited." Thomas brightened at this compromise. "After Christmas, then. I can wait that long, knowing there's hope." He squeezed her hand. "And I'll use the time to make the ranch even more hospitable for a bride." That evening, as Zara recorded the day's transactions in the hotel ledger, Tucker entered the lobby, stomping snow from his boots. He had been away for nearly 2 weeks, driving some of his cattle to the railhead at Flagstaff for shipment east. "Evening, Miss Keller," he greeted her. "Is my sister about?" "She's helping in the kitchen," Zara replied, suddenly conscious of her quickened pulse. "Welcome back to Williams. Was your journey successful?" "Successful enough," he said. "Got a fair price for the steers despite the early snow up north." He hesitated, then added, "I stopped by Thomas's place on my way back. His ranch is looking better. New fencing, repaired roof on the barn." "Yes, he's been working very hard," Zara acknowledged. Tucker studied her face. "Has he asked you to reconsider the marriage?" Zara was startled by his directness. "He has. I told him I would give my answer after Christmas." Something flickered in Tucker's eyes, resignation perhaps, or something deeper. "I see. That seems wise. A significant decision shouldn't be rushed." An awkward silence fell between them. Zara found herself wishing he would say more, would give her some reason to question her tentative agreement with Thomas. But Tucker remained proper, respectful of boundaries that seemed increasingly arbitrary to Zara. "Well, I should find Sarah," he finally said. "Good evening, Miss Keller." "Mr. Young," she acknowledged, watching him walk away with a heaviness in her heart she couldn't fully explain. November brought more snow and colder temperatures. The hotel grew busier as travelers sought shelter from the worsening weather. Thomas called on Zara regularly, their courtship progressing with comfortable familiarity. Tucker, meanwhile, seemed to be making himself scarce in town, though Zara occasionally heard news of him through Sarah. As Thanksgiving approached, Mrs. Henderson announced that the hotel would host a special dinner for guests and selected townspeople. The preparations kept Zara busy, but she found her mind often wandering to thoughts of Tucker, wondering what he was doing, if he thought of her at all. The day before Thanksgiving, Thomas arrived at the hotel with an invitation. "I was hoping you might join me for dinner tomorrow," he said. "I know the hotel is hosting a meal, but I thought perhaps it might be nice for us to have our first Thanksgiving together, at the ranch." The invitation touched Zara. "That's very thoughtful, Thomas, but I've promised Mrs. Henderson I would help with the hotel dinner. Perhaps I could come afterward, late afternoon." Thomas agreed to this compromise, and the next day, after the hotel's successful Thanksgiving feast, the blacksmith's son drove Zara out to Thomas's ranch in his wagon. The transformation of the property since her first visit was remarkable. The garden had been cleared and prepared for spring planting, the house and barn repairs completed, and a new chicken coop stood ready for inhabitants. Inside, the house was nearly unrecognizable. Gone was the disorder of her first visit, replaced by clean simplicity. A fire burned cheerfully in the hearth, and the table was set with what were clearly Thomas's best dishes. "This is wonderful," Zara said, genuinely impressed. "You've worked miracles here." Thomas beamed with pride. "Wait until you taste dinner. I've been practicing my cooking skills." The meal was simple but well-prepared: roast chicken, potatoes, carrots from Tucker's garden, a fact Thomas mentioned with only the slightest edge in his voice, and an apple pie purchased from the hotel kitchen. As they ate, Thomas spoke of his plans for the ranch, expanding the cattle herd in spring, possibly hiring a hand to help with the heavier work, adding more furniture to make the house comfortable for a wife. For the first time since her arrival in Williams, Zara could truly envision herself married to Thomas, sharing this home, building a life together. After dinner, as they sat by the fire drinking coffee, Thomas took her hand. "I know we agreed to wait until after Christmas for your answer, but I want you to know that I'm more certain than ever. I want you to be my wife, Zara. I believe we could build something good here together." The sincerity in his eyes was unmistakable. This was a man who had faced his demons and, while perhaps not conquering them completely, had at least learned to control them. A man trying desperately to rebuild his life and looking to her to be part of that future. "I believe that too," Zara said softly, meaning it. Yet even as the words left her lips, an image of Tucker Young flashed in her mind: his steady gaze, his quiet strength, the way her heart seemed to recognize something in him that it never quite found in Thomas. The moment was interrupted by the sound of approaching hoofbeats. Thomas frowned, rising to check the window. "It's Tucker," he said, surprise and a hint of annoyance in his voice. "What's he doing here on Thanksgiving?" He opened the door before Tucker could knock. The rancher stood on the porch, hat in hand, looking slightly uncomfortable. "Evening, Thomas." "Miss Keller," he greeted them. "Sorry to intrude on your holiday." "What brings you out here, Tucker?" Thomas asked, his tone carefully neutral. "One of your steers broke through the fence into my north pasture," Tucker explained. "Normally, I'd just drive it back myself, but it's got a pretty bad gash on its flank. Thought you'd want to know right away so you can treat it." Thomas's expression shifted from annoyance to concern. "How bad is it?" "Needs stitching, I'd say. Caught itself on a broken fence post." Thomas sighed, turning to Zara. "I'm sorry, but I need to see to this. A good breeding steer is valuable, and infection could set in fast in this weather." "Of course," Zara said. "You should go." "It'll likely take some time," Thomas said regretfully, "and it's getting late." "Tucker, could you see Miss Keller safely back to town after we deal with the steer?" Tucker hesitated, glancing between them. "If that's agreeable to Miss Keller, of course." Zara nodded, trying to ignore the flutter in her stomach at the prospect of being alone with Tucker. "That would be fine." "Thank you." As Thomas gathered his coat and medical supplies for the steer, Tucker remained on the porch, as if reluctant to enter the house, Thomas's territory. When Thomas was ready, the two men rode off toward Tucker's property, leaving Zara to wait by the fire. Nearly 2 hours passed before Tucker returned alone. "Thomas is staying with the steer tonight," he explained. "It's a valuable animal and the stitching was tricky. He doesn't want to leave it until he's sure it'll be all right." "I understand," Zara said, gathering her shawl and bonnet. "Is the horse badly hurt?" "It'll recover with proper care," Tucker assured her, helping her into her coat. "Thomas knows what he's doing with livestock." The night had grown much colder, and Tucker insisted Zara take the extra blanket from his saddle to wrap around herself before mounting his horse. He swung up behind her, keeping a respectful distance between their bodies, though the arrangement necessitated his arms around her to hold the reins. They rode in silence for a time, the only sounds the horses' hoofbeats on the frozen ground and their own breath clouding in the cold air. Zara was acutely aware of Tucker's presence behind her, his warmth, his strength, the faint scent of pine and leather that seemed to be part of him. "Thomas has made remarkable improvements to his ranch," Tucker finally said. "He's working hard to make it suitable for a wife." "Yes, he is," Zara agreed. Then, gathering her courage, she added, "He asked me again today to marry him." Tucker was silent for so long that Zara wondered if he had heard her. When he finally spoke, his voice was carefully controlled. "And what did you tell him?" "That I believe we could build a good life together," Zara replied, wishing she could see Tucker's face. Another long silence. "Then, is that what you want, Zara? A good life with Thomas?" The directness of the question, coming in the intimate darkness, broke something loose inside her. "I don't know," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I came west to marry him. He's trying so hard to be the man I thought he was. I care for him, respect his efforts to change. But, Tucker prompted softly when she didn't continue. Zara took a deep breath. "But my heart isn't certain, and I don't know if that's because I'm still getting to know him or because." "Because?" His voice was closer now, his breath warm against her ear. "Because sometimes I think it might belong elsewhere," she finished, scarcely believing her own boldness. Tucker's arms tightened slightly around her, but he said nothing. They rode the rest of the way to town in a silence charged with unspoken words. When they reached the hotel, Tucker dismounted first, then helped Zara down, his hands lingering at her waist a moment longer than necessary. "Thank you for the escort, Mr. Young," she said formally, aware they were on the main street where anyone might see them. "My pleasure, Miss Keller," he replied, equally formal. Then, in a lower voice meant only for her, he added, "Your heart deserves certainty, Zara. Don't settle for less." With that, he mounted his horse and rode away, leaving Zara standing in the cold night with a mind full of questions and a heart more confused than ever. December arrived with heavy snows and bitter cold. The hotel filled with travelers stranded by weather, keeping Zara busier than ever. Thomas continued calling on her twice weekly, their courtship progressing with comfortable familiarity. Tucker, meanwhile, seemed to be avoiding town, though Sarah mentioned he was preparing for a cattle drive to Phoenix, where the winter was milder. As Christmas approached, Zara found herself increasingly torn between obligation and desire. Thomas had fulfilled his promise to change, had created a home worthy of a wife, and clearly adored her. Yet in quiet moments, her thoughts invariably turned to Tucker, to his quiet strength, his integrity, the connection she felt in his presence that defied rational explanation. One afternoon, a week before Christmas, Sarah sought out Zara with a troubled expression. "Have you heard the news?" "Thomas was seen at the Silver Dollar late last night." Zara's heart sank. "Drinking?" Sarah nodded grimly. "According to Jim at the livery, he was there for hours, left barely able to sit his horse. But he promised," Zara whispered, disappointment washing over her. "He's been sober for months." "I'm sorry," Sarah said, squeezing her hand. "People in town are saying it's because Tucker's leaving tomorrow for Phoenix, that Thomas is celebrating getting his rival out of the way." "That's absurd," Zara protested. "Tucker isn't." But she couldn't finish the sentence. Wasn't he exactly that? A rival for her affections, even if neither man would acknowledge it openly. That evening, Thomas didn't appear for their scheduled dinner. The following morning, a note arrived at the hotel. "Dearest Zara, I have failed you and myself. The temptation became too great, and I surrendered to weakness. I cannot face you today, but please know that I am deeply ashamed and determined to begin again. With deepest regrets." Thomas. Zara read the note several times, her emotions a tangle of disappointment, anger, and a shameful hint of relief, as if Thomas's lapse had somehow released her from an obligation. She was still contemplating the note when Tucker entered the hotel lobby, dressed for travel in a heavy coat and with saddlebags over his shoulder. "Miss Keller," he greeted her, his expression serious. "I'm leaving for Phoenix within the hour. Wanted to say goodbye." "I heard," she said. "Sarah mentioned your cattle drive." Tucker glanced around the lobby, then lowered his voice. "I also heard about Thomas. I'm sorry." "It's not your concern," Zara said, more sharply than she intended. "No, it's not," Tucker agreed. "But I care about your happiness, Zara." "More than I should, perhaps." The admission hung between them, significant and dangerous. "How long will you be gone?" Zara asked, ignoring his last statement. "A month, possibly longer. Depends on the weather, the cattle prices in Phoenix." He studied her face. "Will you have made your decision by then?" "About marrying Thomas, we agreed to decide after Christmas," Zara confirmed. "Though recent events may change that timeline." Tucker nodded, his expression unreadable. "Whatever you decide, I wish you happiness, Zara Keller." He touched the brim of his hat. "Goodbye." "Safe travels, Tucker," she replied softly. As he turned to leave, Zara was struck by the finality in his farewell. If she agreed to marry Thomas while Tucker was away, this could well be their last private conversation. The thought sent a wave of panic through her. "Tucker, wait," she called, moving from behind the desk to approach him. He turned back, hope and wariness battling in his eyes. "I—" Zara began, then faltered, unsure what she wanted to say. Tucker took a half step toward her, close enough that she could see the flecks of gray in his blue eyes. "Yes. Be careful on your journey," she finally said, her courage failing her. "Williams won't be the same without you." A flicker of disappointment crossed his face, but he nodded. "Take care of yourself, Zara." Then, so quietly she almost didn't hear, he added, "Remember what I said. Your heart deserves certainty." With that, he was gone, the hotel door closing behind him with a finality that left Zara hollow. 2 days passed with no word from Thomas. On the third day, as Zara was arranging holly boughs in the hotel dining room for Christmas decorations, he appeared in the doorway, hat in hand, looking haggard but sober. "Zara," he greeted her, his voice rough. "May I speak with you?" They moved to a quiet corner of the lobby. Thomas stood awkwardly, turning his hat in his hands. "I owe you an apology," he began. "I broke my promise to you, to myself." "Yes, you did," Zara agreed, her disappointment still raw. "What happened, Thomas?" he sighed heavily. "I heard Tucker was leaving town. I told myself one drink to celebrate wouldn't hurt, but one became many and—" He shook his head. "There's no excuse." "Why would you celebrate Tucker leaving?" Zara asked, though she suspected she knew the answer. Thomas met her eyes directly. "Because I'm not blind, Zara. I see how he looks at you, how you look at him sometimes." Zara flushed, unable to deny it. "Thomas, no, please let me finish," he interrupted. "I've been thinking these past days, about you, about us, about what I'm asking of you." He took a deep breath. "When I placed that advertisement for a bride, I was looking for someone to help me rebuild my life, to fill the emptiness Catherine and James and little Matthew left behind." "That's natural," Zara said gently. "Maybe, but it's not fair to you." Thomas's eyes were pained but honest. "You deserve someone who's whole, Zara, not someone who might always be one bad day away from reaching for a bottle." "You've been so strong these past months," she protested, though her heart recognized the truth in his words. "Because I had something to prove. To you, to Tucker, to this town." Thomas shook his head. "But that's not enough, not for a lifetime together." Zara was silent, absorbing his words, surprised by his insight. "I'm releasing you from our arrangement," Thomas said finally. "You don't need to wait until Christmas to decide. I'm deciding for both of us." Thomas, that's not necessary. It is, he insisted. Because I care for you too much to tie you to a man you don't love, not when there's someone else who might make you truly happy. The simple truth of it hung between them. Zara felt tears welling in her eyes, not for the future she was losing, but for the good man before her who was setting her free despite his own pain. "What will you do?" she asked softly. Thomas managed a small smile. "Keep rebuilding, one day at a time. Maybe someday find someone whose heart is truly free to love me." He reached out to touch her cheek gently. "Be happy, Zara. That's all I ask." With that, he turned and left, his shoulders straighter than when he had arrived, as if unburdened by a weight he had carried too long. Zara stood in the lobby long after he'd gone, her mind whirling with conflicting emotions. Relief, sadness, gratitude for Thomas's selflessness. And beneath it all, a growing certainty about where her heart truly belonged, but Tucker was gone, potentially for months. And she had no guarantee that he returned her feelings, only hints and unspoken possibilities. Christmas arrived, blanketing Williams in fresh snow that transformed the frontier town into something from a fairy tale. The hotel hosted a grand dinner for guests and townspeople, keeping Zara too busy to dwell on her uncertain future. Thomas attended, sober and dignified, exchanging polite greetings with her, but keeping his distance. New Year's passed in similar fashion, the town celebrating in the hotel's dining room with music and dancing. Zara found herself watching the door, hoping against hope that Tucker might return early, but the night ended without his appearance. January brought bitter cold and news of severe storms in the mountains between Williams and Phoenix. Sarah grew increasingly worried about Tucker, checking daily with travelers for news from the south. "The passes are blocked with snow," she told Zara one evening in mid-January. "No one's been able to get through for nearly 2 weeks." "Tucker knows the territory," Zara reassured her, though her own worry gnawed at her. "He'll wait out the storm somewhere safe." The third week of January brought a break in the weather and finally, a rider from the south with news. Tucker's cattle drive had reached Phoenix safely, the man reported, but Tucker himself had been delayed, helping another rancher whose wagon had broken an axle in rough country. He was expected to start the journey back within days. Relief flooded through Zara at this news, though it was tempered by continued uncertainty. What would she say to Tucker when he returned? How could she explain the tumult of her feelings during his absence? January gave way to February, bringing slightly milder temperatures but still no sign of Tucker. Then, on a clear, cold morning in the second week of the month, as Zara was sweeping the hotel porch, a familiar figure rode slowly down Williams Main Street. Tucker looked trail-worn and tired, his face leaner than when he'd left, but his back was straight and his eyes alert as ever. He spotted Zara on the hotel porch and reined in his horse, touching the brim of his hat in greeting. "Miss Keller," he called. "Hotel still standing without me around to deliver vegetables." Zara couldn't help the smile that spread across her face. "We've managed somehow, Mr. Young. Welcome back to Williams." Tucker dismounted, leading his horse to the hitching post. Up close, she could see the fatigue etched in his face, but his eyes brightened as they met hers. "Is Sarah about?" he asked. "I should let her know I made it back in one piece." "She's at the Mercantile," Zara replied. "Expected back soon." She hesitated, then added, "We were worried when we heard about the storms." "Had to hole up in a line shack for nearly 2 weeks," Tucker confirmed. "Not the most comfortable accommodations, but better than freezing in a mountain pass." An awkward silence fell between them. There was so much Zara wanted to say, but the middle of the street didn't seem the right place. "Well, I should get this horse to the livery," Tucker said finally. "Just wanted to let you know I was back." "Tucker," Zara said, stopping him as he turned to go. "Thomas and I. Our arrangement has ended." Tucker went very still. "Has it?" Zara nodded. "It was his decision, actually," he said. She took a deep breath. "He said I deserved someone whose heart is whole and that mine might belong elsewhere." Tucker's eyes searched hers, hope warring with caution. "And does it belong elsewhere?" "I think you know the answer to that," Zara said softly. Tucker glanced around the street, clearly aware they were in public view. "Might I call on you this evening, after I've had a chance to clean up and rest a bit?" "I'd like that very much," Zara replied, her heart lighter than it had been in months. Tucker's answering smile was like the sun breaking through clouds. "Until tonight, then." The hours until evening stretched endlessly. Zara found herself watching the clock, her work suffering from distraction. Finally, as the winter sun began to set, Tucker appeared at the hotel, freshly shaven and dressed in clean clothes, a small bouquet of dried flowers in his hand. "These aren't much," he said as he presented them to her. "Best I could do in February." "They're perfect," Zara assured him, tucking one of the flowers into her hair. They walked through town to the small restaurant where Zara had often dined with Thomas, aware of curious eyes following their progress. In Williams, little went unnoticed or uncommented upon. Over a simple meal, Tucker told her about his journey, the challenges of the cattle drive, the unexpected delay helping the stranded rancher, the long, cold wait in the line shack for the storms to pass. "I had a lot of time to think, those weeks in the mountains," Tucker said as they lingered over coffee. "About what I wanted from life, what was missing." "And what did you decide?" Zara asked. Tucker's eyes held hers. "That I've been building a ranch for 10 years without building a life to go with it. That an empty house, no matter how well constructed, isn't really a home." He reached across the table to take her hand. "That I should have spoken sooner, been braver about what I felt for you from the moment I saw you at that saloon." Zara's heart raced at his words. "Why didn't you?" "Because you came to Williams to marry Thomas," Tucker replied simply. "I respected that, respected him, despite his troubles. It wasn't my place to interfere beyond helping you both through a difficult situation. Even when you realized there might be feelings between us, especially then." Tucker squeezed her hand gently. "I didn't want to be the man who stole another man's intended bride. That's not who I am." "And now?" Zara asked softly. "Now I'm sitting across from the most remarkable woman I've ever known," Tucker said. "A woman who crossed a continent on the promise of a better life, who faced disappointment with dignity and courage, who built a place for herself in a strange town through her own merit." His blue eyes were steady on hers. "A woman I've fallen in love with against all my better judgment." The words Zara had longed to hear nearly stopped her breath. "Tucker, I know it's too soon," he continued quickly. "You need time after everything with Thomas. I don't expect—" "I love you too," Zara interrupted, the words escaping before she could measure them. "I think I have since that day by the creek, when you told me my heart deserved certainty." Tucker's expression transformed with joy. "Zara," he breathed, lifting her hand to his lips. They left the restaurant hand in hand, walking slowly through the starlit streets of Williams. When they reached the hotel, Tucker turned to her, his expression serious once more. "I want to court you properly," he said. "No rush, no pressure. You've had enough upheaval since coming west." Zara smiled up at him, touched by his consideration. "I'd like that." Under the watchful eye of the hotel's night clerk, Tucker leaned down to place a gentle kiss on Zara's lips, brief, proper, but filled with promise. "Good night, Zara Keller," he whispered. "Good night, Tucker Young," she replied, a future unfurling before her eyes, as vast and promising as the Arizona sky. Spring came early to Williams that year. the snows melting to reveal tender green shoots and wildflowers dotting the meadows. Zara and Tucker's courtship progressed with the changing seasons, their love growing stronger with each passing day. Thomas Yates remained in Williams, keeping largely to himself as he continued rebuilding his ranch and his life. He maintained sobriety, joining a temperance society that had formed in town, and gradually began participating in community events again. When Tucker formally asked Zara to marry him in late April, Thomas was among the first to offer congratulations, his good wishes genuine if tinged with wistfulness. They married in May, when the aspen trees were in full leaf and wildflowers carpeted the meadows around Tucker's ranch. The entire town of Williams turned out for the celebration, the community embracing the union of the steady rancher and the Eastern bride who had arrived on the wrong doorstep, but found her true home nonetheless. As summer approached, Zara stood on the porch of what was now their home, watching Tucker work with a young colt in the corral. The ranch flourished under their joint care, Zara bringing her organizational skills and fresh perspective, Tucker contributing his years of hard-earned knowledge and unwavering dedication. "Penny for your thoughts, Mrs. Young," Tucker said, coming up the porch steps and pressing a kiss to her temple. Zara leaned into his embrace, content in a way she had never imagined possible. "I was just thinking about how differently things might have turned out if you hadn't been in that saloon the day I arrived." Tucker's arms tightened around her. "Some things are meant to be, I think. We might have taken a different path to get here, but I believe we would have found each other eventually." "Such a romantic," Zara teased, turning in his arms to face him. "Only with you," he assured her, bending to kiss her properly. As the sun set behind the pines, casting long shadows across the ranch, they now shared. Zara knew with absolute certainty that her heart had found its true home in the vast Arizona wilderness, not in the arms she had traveled west to find, but in those that had been waiting to catch her when she fell. In the years that followed, the young ranch prospered, expanding its operations and becoming one of the most successful in northern Arizona. Zara and Tucker welcomed 2 children, a son named James, in honor of Thomas's fallen friend, and a daughter they called Hope, for what had brought them together and sustained them through all challenges. Thomas Yates eventually married a widow who arrived in Williams with her young son, finding healing in their shared understanding of loss and renewal. He and Tucker slowly rebuilt their friendship, the old wounds healing with time and mutual respect. And Zara, who had once been a mail-order bride seeking security in an uncertain world, discovered that the greatest security came not from written promises or formal arrangements, but from the steady love of the man who had intervened, when she needed it most, the quiet cowboy whose heart had recognized hers from the very beginning.